One thing that always drives me crazy about the regressives is their focus on race. And I can say the same thing about gender and sexual orientation because most of the same concepts apply. But today I'm going to focus on their race fetish. There is something seriously wrong with a group of people who point their fingers at everyone else and call them racist while being laser focused on race themselves. These people are hypocrites. Of course, they don't care. They've invented this mythology wherein they're the good guys and everyone else is bad. But when you start to take apart their ideas and examine them piece by piece, you find that, in fact, they are the bad guys almost exclusively. They just don't want to admit it. Just like the slave owners of old wouldn't admit that they were bad, they just invented rationalizations to get around that fact. Therefore, let's take a look at race and racism in the modern world and find out why the whole thing is such a disaster for the regressive left. First, let's look at the definition of racism that they use. It's phrased in different ways, but the essence of their belief is prejudice plus power equals racism. They do this specifically so that their pet groups cannot be labeled racists. In other words, they're just defining their way out of an uncomfortable situation. And it's uncomfortable for them because they have no other way of stopping groups on their side of the ideological divide from being rightfully defined as racist. Besides, their definition is ludicrous on its face. If we're going to talk about individual people, the overwhelming majority have no power whatsoever to impose race-based discrimination on anyone. I mean, Bill Gates might, if he was a racist, and Obama certainly does, if he was a racist, but your average Joe and Jane Doe? They certainly do not. Therefore, the regressive definition simply makes no sense. And that's why they have to refer to racism as systemic, just as they pretend that there's a super secret magical patriarchy that makes everyone sexist. It's essentially conspiracy theorist nonsense because it's the only way they can protect their precious oppression stack. The whole idea is nonsense. Therefore, here's the definition that I use for racism, which is all-inclusive, and unfortunately for the far left, it makes their side look bad. Racism is paying attention to the color of someone's skin as a means of making a determination of their worth, either positive or negative. Meaning if you think this person is better than someone else solely on the basis of their skin color, or this person is more oppressed than someone else solely on the basis of their skin color, you're a racist. And that makes the vast majority of regressives racist. They tend to think not of individuals, but in collectivist terms. People are grouped by their characteristics. People are characterized by their race and their gender and their sexual orientation, such that everybody within each individual group are all assumed to share the same attributes. All black people are oppressed. All white people are privileged. All men are potential rapists. The list goes on and on and on. But none of that can be rationally justified. People are individuals. They're not part of some grand collective. And that means that people need to be judged on their own merits, not on the assumption that all black people are alike or all white people are alike. This makes the leftist desire to stick people into racially defined boxes much more difficult because they can't generalize about things that are simply not amenable to generalization. I think that's really where the left falls apart because they're incapable of dealing with individuals and individual motivations. They can only look at people as parts of some ill-defined group and assume that they're all the same, even if they're not. So let's look at what racism actually is, rather than the bizarre leftist delusion of what it is. As I said, I define racism as paying attention to the color of someone's skin as a means of making determinations of their worth, positive or negative. And that means that groups like the KKK are absolutely racist, as are groups like Black Lives Matter. Both focus on the color of someone's skin rather than the content of their individual character. Both of them want racial segregation, and both assert that they're being put upon by people on the other side of the racial divide. How anyone can argue that one side is racist and the other is not is absurd. And of course, it's not just hatred of blacks or whites that make the racist cut. As I've said before, over on Minds, there's a thriving anti-Semitic community that's openly racist against Jews and proud of it. And these people are scum, every bit as much as black racists and white racists. Racism is the sign of an immature mind. Now you might ask, how would I, as a white guy, know any of this? Because I've never given a damn about race. I mean, growing up, I dated at least one black girl semi-seriously. I dated two Hispanic girls, one of which was much more serious than the other. And I was engaged to a girl who was half Chinese. I didn't care. Their race never impacted my decisions one bit. We had things in common, we enjoyed each other's company, and race was completely irrelevant. But it wasn't to my mother. Now, she grew up in an age where latent racism was the norm. Her parents weren't actively racist, but there was a feeling that maybe the races shouldn't mix. And when I got engaged to a half-Chinese girl, that came out a little bit with concerns over how any future children would be treated. Now, of course, in the modern world, nobody cares, but that's how she naturally thought about it. It wasn't until later that I think she realized how ridiculous it all was, and today I don't think she's got a racist bone in her body. She went from having all white friends to having friends of every race, and I don't think it was even something she thought about, it was just something that naturally came to her. But sometimes it just takes a step outside of your comfort zone and having experiences that you've never faced before to make you realize just how wrong you are. And that's a good thing. Now, I do want to differentiate between racism and personal preference because there are people on the far left who don't seem to know the difference. Racism has to do with value. Preference does not. If someone prefers someone with blue eyes over someone with green eyes, for example, they're not saying that blue-eyed people are better than green-eyed people. They're just stating a preference. But on the regressive left, having a preference is no different from being a bigot. According to Riley Dennis, for example, not wanting to go out with a transgendered person is somehow being a horrible human being. Well, no. I don't go out with transgendered people because I'm straight. Granted, I've been married for 25 years and I don't go out with anybody, but you know what I mean. It's the same reason I don't go out with men, or dogs, or trees. I'm not saying that any of those things are bad, just that they're not for me. I don't impose my preferences on others, and I will not accept others trying to impose their preferences on me. Everyone should have the opportunity to find happiness. Now, that's no guarantee, but that's neither here nor there. So anyhow, what do you think? I find the regressive definition of racism to be complete nonsense. It's just an attempt to skew things their way by defining their position as the only proper position there is. They do the same thing with feminism and pretty much everything else. But that's not how you argue a position. It's horribly immature, but that's what the regressive left is. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, I'll see you all next time.
Everything changes.